Okay, welcome to this third part of the fundamentals of 3D modeling for games, the car. This should be the final chapter in the creation of the car here. In terms of the modeling, anyway, there will be videos that follow dealing with unwrapping UVs, dealing with texturing, and dealing with rendering. But in terms of the modeling, this should be the final chapter. In this chapter, we're going to be taking a look at creating our high poly version of our car based off the low poly version that we've created in the previous videos. I have my file open, and over in my channel editor, I again have my reference image on a separate layer, and I have my low poly vehicle in its own layer as well. To begin with, I'm going to hide the reference layer, and I'm going to select all of the elements of the car that I made. Everything has been named with the suffix _low. This is going to help when we get to our texturing. To begin with, I'm going to go to Edit and Duplicate to create a duplicate version of everything that I just had selected. Excuse me. This will create a duplicate version of the car. I'm going to create a new layer containing what I currently have selected, which is the duplicate, and that new layer will be renamed High Poly. I'm going to color this layer red, again, just as an indicator to stop, do not export this. And I'll remove the visibility of our low poly layer, thus giving me just the high poly elements here that need to be created. We'll be starting with a duplicate of the low poly version of the car, and we'll be manipulating the geometry to create something higher resolution to capture normal maps from. Each and every mesh will need to be high poly on its own. To begin with, I'm going to hit 3 on the keyboard, and this should give us a preview of what this object is going to look like when the high poly modifier is applied. Currently, nothing really looks good. We're getting a lot of blobby, rounded edges. Geometry is pulling away from itself, and there's a lot of ugliness in the shapes. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going and manipulating this in order to create shapes that read a lot better. I'm going to use my outliner as a means of determining the order in which I do things. This will just make it a little bit easier to track what's been done and what hasn't been done. I'm going to use naming as a means of identifying when I've completed something. So here I have grill trim _low 1 selected. I'm going to hit Control 1 to isolate this object. And this is actually going to be called grill trim _high when I'm done. This is going to allow me to manipulate this object and then use the name to tell me that I've completed it. What I want to do is I want to go find my Crease tool. This is under Mesh Tools, Crease. And I'm going to open up the settings and just make sure that the tool has been reset so that it is using its default settings. And I can close that now. Now what this is going to do is it's going to place this tool here in the recently used or last used tool. And the way this tool works is if I hit 1 here to return back to our low poly version, I can go and select some edges. In this case, the edge here that runs along the inside of this shape. I'm going to go back to my high poly version by hitting 3. And with the Crease tool on, I'm going to middle mouse button click and drag on this edge. When I do, it'll harden that edge, giving us a cleaner shape. Something a little bit more like what we're trying to achieve. I'm going to do the same here with this edge, which also should be a little bit harder. This other edge here doesn't matter so much. but this corner one does. And I'll do the same over here. Again, I'm going to return and middle mouse button click and drag. Like so. Looking at this now, it now appears to have the shape that I was intending it to have. And if we get out of our high poly preview, I can see this in relation to the rest of the vehicle. Looks pretty good. Next, I'll go and rename this asset. Instead of grill trim underscore low, we're going to get grill trim underscore high. Indicating to me now that this asset is now complete. And I can move on to the next one. Grill underscore low. This one's a lot easier to do, as here, every edge just needs to be hardened. Once that is done, we can get out of our preview or out of our isolation mode and see that that is now holding up quite nicely. With two assets done, I'll go and rename this one grill underscore high and move on to the next one. Now this mesh is the largest and most complex, the car body. This is going to take the largest amount of tweaking in order to get the shapes all exactly the way that I would like them. The trick here is not to get overwhelmed by the shape and just slowly and methodically move through the geometry, creating the shapes that we want to have. It would appear that I have an error here in my geometry. It looks like I have either an open face or two edges that have not been properly welded together. This happens every now and then from poor low poly modeling and is going to need to be corrected both in the high poly and in the low poly version of my asset. To correct it, I'm first going to identify what the error is. In this case, an edge that does not continue where it should. And I'm going to correct the edge, the error, which has been done by just adding an extra section down here underneath the wheels. And I now have two vertices that need to be welded together. I can either target weld, remembering to turn off my vertex selection, closing up the shape, remembering to do the other side. And before I do anything else, I need to go correct the same error in the low poly version. It's always going to be easier to correct your errors if you do both at the same time. Trying to remember afterwards what you had fixed and what you hadn't, or what needed fixing, will always result in something getting missed. Leaving this open wouldn't have been the end of the world, as this is just an area in behind our wheels. But it is definitely an important step to take when changing things between your high poly and your low. Now I can continue along my way. I'll need to return back to my crease tool in order to continue creasing. Here, it would appear I've creased the wrong edge. So I'll simply undo. And then go and find the correct edge to crease. Again, giving me a far more accurate shape. Now I'm trying to remain on a single side of the vehicle here. I'm doing the driver's side alone. I'll return and do the passenger side afterwards. But I find it important to stay on one side to ensure that you get everything done, at least on one side of your mesh, just to make sure that things don't get forgotten. Here I was experimenting with an edge to see if changing its shape made the shape of the vehicle look any better. In this case it did not, and so I just did not crease it. A lot of times I'll need to revert back down to my lower poly, get out of preview mode, in order to crease things in the right way. Here, creasing is creating an ugly shape on my geometry, so I'm going to need to create an additional crease underneath the vehicle on a flattened spot in order to help hold the shape together. I may also need to exit out of isolation view in order to make sure that some areas that are supposed to be creased do end up getting the crease so that they hold their shape correctly. Here, I'm going to need to crease two elements at the same time. I have this ridge that runs along the side of the car door and ends up jumping into the next section. To do this, I'll just simply select both elements together using Shift, and now I can go and grab the edges that I need and middle mouse click in order to solidify them. Here too, another error has been encountered in my geometry, something else that I missed doing my low poly. I left n-gons on this shape by not continuing to cut and connect these shapes down here. This will help hold the volume of this shape together a little bit better. The same will need to be done down here. This will help hold the volume together a lot better. And, as before, when encountering an error, I need to return to my low poly and again correct the same error. With the correction done, again I'll hide my low poly, return to my high poly, and again continue along my way, adjusting my creasing. That reads quite nicely, and it does move across the gap between the door and the body. Now, another thing we need to discuss is that the door and the body, while there is a gap between them, that gap is infinitesimally small. It is minute. The vertices are right against one another, and as a result, we can't really see where the door ends and where the body begins. This is going to cause a problem when we get to our high poly, or when we get to our normal matte baking, as there's no real way of defining where one of these objects ends and where the other one begins. And we do want to have that distinction. We do want to make sure that very clearly we are able to illustrate where these things are. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to isolate my car door. I'm going to run around the perimeter here in edge mode. I'll switch to my move tool, And in fact, I'm going to remove this selection of edges. And I'm just going to hold Shift to extrude and bring this out a little bit. I'll enter vertex mode, where I'll go in target weld. These vertices into one another. Followed by returning to my Crease Tool and selecting these new edges that were just created and creasing them. This will give the door a little thickness, and even though this door will not be one that is opened, this will allow us to actually show a gap in between the door and the body of the vehicle, if even just by having the metal look like it's turning and going inside. Evidently, an edge was missed here. And that will now clean up that shape quite a bit. Now, inadvertently, in going from the body into working on this little detail, I've moved into the doors, and so this is going to be problematic. I might as well, while I'm here, go and duplicate the door onto the other side, selecting two objects and combining them. And try that again. I'm going to freeze my transforms and delete my history. And there. Again, I'm going to double check that my high poly is still looking the way that I expected it to. And I can now go and rename this object underscore high. Then I can return to the body and continue along where I was. Returning to my Crease Tool and creasing, again, the edges that require holding the shape. This is beginning to look quite good. Again, following the contours of the shape, creasing where things require a little bit more contour to hold them together. Middle mouse button, click and drag in order to help hold those shapes together. Okay. I'm pretty pleased with this side. Again, I just want to double check that it looks the way I expect it to. Evidently an edge somewhere in the back here. Excuse me. So these all seem to work quite nicely. Again, just double checking that I haven't missed anything, that every edge I wanted to be more rigid is more rigid. I'm just going to do a test with this outer edge here and see the kind of shape it gives me. And I think I'm going to be okay without that one. A little bit of curvature here. I believe will help hold that shape together as well. Okay, the next thing I want to do here, I'm going to go into object mode and isolate my mesh. And since I've gone and done all of the nice clean edges on the driver's side, I can simply delete the passenger side and reproduce it, combining these two things together, and again, merging my vertices together. So that again, I end up with a single shape. I'll freeze the transforms and delete the history on this object. And now with it done, I'll go in and rename it. Carbody underscore high. And I'm now pleased with that object. The next one in my list is the Windows underscore low. And I might as well, while I'm here, do the window trim as well. Since these two objects are more or less interconnected, it makes sense to make sure that I'm creasing these at the same time. So I've got to find the right edge that needs creasing in order to hold the window trim in the right place. And here I'm going to remove the preview off of the low poly version of the window. Since these are planar objects, they don't really need to be held in place. I'll just simply go and match the edges on the passenger side that have been hardened on the driver's side. And these two objects are now done. Next are the hubcaps. I'm going to try and do all 5 at the same time. This way, any kind of exploratory shape that I make, I can ensure will be the same on each of these things. Here, I'm going to do a little extra work. While I'm pleased with what the edge creasing is giving me, it's not entirely the shape that I'd like to have. I actually would like to have a few divots inside of these hubs to make them look even better. So, I'm going to need to do some additional high poly. To do this, I'm first going to smooth the hubs with a single division here. This is just going to add a little bit of roundedness to this, and more importantly, give me some extra faces. These new faces, I can select an inset, give me a little bevel, just to create a little extra detail here that's not present. So with every other set of faces selected, we're going to go to, not bridge, bevel, and I'm going to take the fraction up a little bit, and the depth nope, I don't like that. Let me undo the bevel. I'm going to do an extrude, and I'm going to use the extrude to bevel. So here we'll take the thickness in a little bit and the offset down a little bit. So I want to keep track of these numbers here. In fact, this would probably make a little bit more sense again if I were to do this to everything. So I'll go around the perimeter of each wheel, selecting these. Last one. Okay. I now have my high poly display turned on. And again, I'm going to go to extrude. I'm going to bring the thickness. Let's see how this is going to work. We'll try this at as a bump. I don't believe that's bad. And then while I'm here, I've gone back using undo until I had all my polygons selected. And I'm going to hold Control and select the edges that make up this shape. And we'll see what creasing them does. Gets us a little bit more round. I'm going to try something else here. I'm going to go back until I have just those faces selection again. And I'm going to grow my selection. I'll then convert to edges. And I'll see if creasing that does any good. Excuse me. And it didn't really appear to do all that much. But it did give us a little bit of an extra detail here that should show up in our normal map on our hub. With that done, I'll delete the history on this object and rename it. And now they're done. Next to the lights, which again I'll isolate, I'll go into my edges and we can start creasing areas that require creasing here. I've got a dual set of edges around each of the fog lights and turn signal. That will look better if they were creased. Nothing requires doing in the headlight. Now we are going to add additional detail to these headlights. I don't want them to just look like a sphere. But this additional detail is actually going to be a lot easier to add once we are texturing. And so I'm going to leave those as is. Next I'll bounce around to the tail light. And this is going to be a little easier to see which edges I wanted here. Selected. Return to my high poly and I'll crease those. Increase that shape. And we'll crease this shape. And there is the shape I was looking for the taillight. I'll do the same thing to the second taillight. Again, just looking to make sure that I'm duplicating the same pattern so that these things look the same once I begin to do my baking. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go in and add an additional detail here that is not part of the low poly. I'm going to do this using the connect. And I'm going to connect all of the perimeter edges on my taillights. Something like this, followed by grabbing my new polygons and extruding them, giving them a little bit of thickness and a little bit of an offset. In order to create this additional bevel detail. This should just give us a little bit, something a little bit more interesting to look at in terms of this just being a box. Again, we can delete the history and rename this asset. Exit isolation mode. And one more piece is done. I return to the outliner. The very next thing are the tires, which again I will isolate. I will go into my edge mode. And we can begin creasing. Here, I'm going to go select the edges that I'd like to have creased, remove the ones that I do not. And I'm going to go to my select menu and grow these along loop. So this is Control and the greater than arrow. Now it looks like There might be a selection error wrong here, so it looks like I might have another geometry error on my wheels. And we'll have to go double check that this is the case or not the case. Is that select along loop did not actually work the way I was expecting it to. Okay. That's a little bit more in line with the way this should be held together. I'm going to go through. We'll see if there's a faster way of doing this. With my selection type here. So here I did it from my side view, my selection, and I selected right through the wheels, which gave me both rear wheels. And if I go to select and along loop, again, we are encountering that error. So it looks like there might be a vertex error. The select along loop doesn't seem to like going all the way around, which is a shame. So I'm going to have to do these manually. Again, I could do a single side of the vehicle and mirror, with the exception of the fact that there are some edges we don't want selected. And the rear wheel here actually won't symmetry so well. Okay, that's all of that one. And I'll just do the same thing with this one. Go and select all the way through. I'm double clicking on each of these edges, which is continuing the edge loop for me all the way along. You can see that the edge loop here does not break when I double click. So grow along loop seems to have an error in it that is not present anywhere else. Okay, this is the spare tire on the back door. And I have only the front passenger side tire remaining. Again, these tires were removed from the rims as they are going to be rubber, and thus shouldn't have any of the rim present on them. Okay. And that should do it for the tires. These are going to give us some pretty funny looking bakes, I believe, once they're done, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So again, tires low, channel box, whoops. And we'll go rename these tires high. Hood low. Here too, like what was done for the car doors, I'm going to be adding some thickness in order to help this create a little bit more of an interesting shape that will look a little bit more accurate. So I'm just going into my side view here to enable me to do both the front, or the driver's side and the passenger side at the same time here. Okay, this should allow me now to target weld these vertices together. Again, I'm going to return to my crease tool. I'm going to also exit isolation mode so that again I can check the shape of this hood against the surrounding geometry, ensuring I have no holes or no gaps. And finally, I'll crease the hood detail. We'll call this one done. The bumpers. I think I'm going to leave the bumpers as is. They look pretty decent already. There are actually some edges here holding things together, and I don't really want them to be much sharper than that. So in this case, this is something that doesn't need editing at all. The door handles too, which were created out of a Taurus, I believe work quite nicely. So we'll also call those done. And there definitely is some work needing done to the edges here on the mirrors. So I'm just going to separate the body of the mirrors from the little arms. Looks like the edge loop did not go all the way. There we are. And there we have it. The mirrors now done. Doors high, car body high. Okay, now that everything has had the creasing done to it, I'm going to go to Edit Mesh. Mesh. And Smooth. And let's give this 3 subdivisions. I'm going to hit Apply. And I'm going to double check that the car has held up nicely. That we aren't getting any really ugly pinching anywhere. You can see that we are getting some gaps here in the windshield. Which don't look too bad. And everything else looks pretty nice. A little bit of pinching going on here. I think that's okay. Yep, I'm going to say I'm quite pleased with that. Again, there's a little bit of a windshield issue, but I don't think that'll matter too much when we do our baking. And everything else looks really nice and clean. I'll save my file. And that should be it. We are now high poly complete and ready for the next step. So, in the next video, we're going to be taking a look at doing some unwrapping, doing some UV coordinates to our low poly version of our car. We'll be exporting both of these assets in preparation for bringing them into Substance Painter. We'll be adding some detailing in terms of paint job onto this car. I hope to see you then.